a sound or you'll wake them in the deepest part of the ancient forest. The flickering candlelight illuminates the faded pages of a story. Hedgehog still sits and tells the stories that people dare not tell before.
The Crystal Bloom. Prologue. The Garden of Frozen Tears. In a forgotten valley, cupped between mountains of sharp, black rock, lay the kingdom of Veridia. It was a place perpetually out of step with the seasons. While the rest of the world knew the turn of spring to summer and the decay of autumn to winter, Veridia existed in a state of muted, melancholic autumn. The skies were forever the color of tarnished silver, the trees wore leaves of dusty gold and rust, and a soft, sighing wind was the only music. This was the work of its ruler, King Theron, the Sorrowful King. His grief was not born of a lost love, but of a lost ideal. Theron was a collector of perfect beauty, and in a world of flawed, transient things, he found only despair. A rose was beautiful, but it would wilt. A song was sublime, but it would end. This imperfection was a constant, agonizing thorn in his soul. Driven by a near madness, he poured his vast wealth and the kingdom's resources into a single, desperate project, to create a beauty that would never fade. He summoned alchemists, glass-blowers, and stonemasons, commanding them to craft a flower from gemstones. They failed. Their creations were cold, dead things. It was a reclusive, half-mad artisan named Kale, who had lost his family to a plague and now saw the world through a lens of crystalline geometry, who found the answer. He discovered a rare, living crystal deep in the mountain caves, a mineral that pulsed with a faint, internal light and grew, infinitesimally slowly, like a plant. He called it Sanguine Quartz. For 10 years, Kale worked in secret, using a fusion of magic, science, and his own blood as a catalyst. He did not carve the crystal, he guided its growth. And on the eve of the king's 50th birthday, he presented his masterpiece. It was a rose, a single, perfect bloom the size of a goblet, carved from living sanguine quartz. Its petals were translucent, holding a soft, rosy light within, as if filled with captured dawn. It was exquisitely detailed, down to the tiny, sharp thorns on its stem. It was eternal. It was flawless. King Theron wept with joy. He named it the Crystal Bloom and placed it in the center of his royal garden, which was immediately cleared of all living plants. The Garden of Frozen Tears was born, a place of gravel paths and stone benches, with the single, glowing rose as its heart. The kingdom celebrated, but Kale, the creator, simply returned to his dark workshop, hollowed out and pale. He had poured more than just his skill into the bloom. He had poured a piece of his own capacity for feeling into it. He felt nothing now, only a cold, satisfied emptiness. And the rose, beautiful and eternal, began to exert its own influence on Veridia. Chapter 1. The Gilded Cage. Princess Lyra, Theron's only child, grew up in the shadow of the bloom. Her world was one of muted colors and hushed tones. The vibrant tapestries in the castle were replaced with gray and silver damask. The musicians were instructed to play only slow, minor key melodies. Laughter was considered vulgar, a disruption to the serene melancholy her father cultivated. Lyra was 17, a girl with eyes the color of a stormy sea and a spirit that chafed against the stillness. She was the one living, breathing, imperfect thing in her father's collection, and she felt his constant, subtle disappointment. She was too loud. Her cheeks were too rosy. Her emotions were too variable. Her only refuge was the castle library, a place even her father neglected, filled with forgotten books that spoke of a world of vibrant life. She read of jungles teeming with noise, of oceans that crashed with fury, of deserts baked by a ruthless sun. These stories were her secret rebellion. She often visited the Garden of Frozen Tears, not to admire the rose, but to feel its strange effect. The air around the bloom was cold and still, and a profound silence hung over it, a silence that seemed to swallow sound and feeling. It was there she met Kale, the creator, who sometimes came to stare at his creation with the empty eyes of a man looking at his own ghost. Why did you make it? Lyra asked him one day, her voice a whisper in the holy silence. Cale didn't look at her. The king desired perfection. I desired to see if it could be done. At what cost? All beauty has a cost, princess, he said, his voice raspy. A real rose drinks water from the soil and sunlight from the sky. This one, he finally turned his eerie, vacant gaze upon her. This one drinks something else. He would say no more. But Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. She began to notice subtle changes in the kingdom. The people in the streets moved more slowly, their faces placid, their conversations hushed. The vibrant, if melancholic, market squares were becoming as still as the king's garden. The very emotion was leaching out of Veridia. The bloom was not just a static object. It was a siphon. Chapter 2. The color of feeling. The change accelerated with the arrival of a traveling troupe of actors. Defying her father's edicts, Lyra smuggled them into the castle to perform a comedy, a wild, rambunctious farce full of mistaken identities and roaring laughter. For one glorious hour, the great hall was alive. The courtiers, initially shocked, began to smile, then to chuckle, and finally to laugh aloud, the sound foreign and wonderful in the stone vaults. Lyra watched, her heart soaring. This was life. This was real. King Theron sat through it all, his face a mask of polite distaste. But as the laughter reached its peak, a servant rushed in, panic on his face. Your Majesty, the bloom. It's fading. The court fell silent. Theron shot to his feet and stormed out, the party forgotten. Lyra followed, a knot of dread in her stomach. In the garden, the crystal bloom was dim. Its internal rosy light had paled to a sickly grey pink. A hairline crack had appeared on one of its outer petals. Theron was apoplectic. What has happened? What has damaged it? It was Cale, summoned from his workshop, who provided the terrible answer. He examined the rose, his thin fingers hovering over the crack without touching it. It is not damaged, Your Majesty, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. It is starved. The bloom does not simply exist. It sustains itself on ambience, on the emotional energy of its surroundings. It requires a diet of subtle sorrow, of quiet melancholy. The raucous, chaotic joy from your hall was a poison to it. It is an organism of perfect stillness. You have fed it noise. The king's eyes widened in understanding, then hardened with resolve. He turned to Lyra, his gaze colder than the garden's air. You see, daughter, your childish indulgences have consequences. Your imperfection threatens the one perfect thing in this kingdom. He decreed then, his voice echoing with finality. Henceforth, all loud celebrations are banned. Public displays of excessive emotion are forbidden. The kingdom will return to the quiet grace the bloom requires. The actors were expelled. The comedy was declared contraband. Veridia was plunged into a silence deeper than before. The people weren't just quiet, they were suppressed, their spirits crushed under the weight of the king's decree. And with every passing day of enforced sorrow, the crystal bloom grew brighter, its rosy glow deepening, the crack healing as if it had never been. Lyra realized the truth. Her father's kingdom was not a refuge for beauty. It was a farm, and its people were the crop. Chapter 3. The Fisher. Lyra could not stand by. Her rebellion turned from secret to overt. She began to sing old, lively folk songs in the courtyards. She wore a scarf of brilliant crimson, a slash of violent color in the grey castle. She sought out the few people who still had fire in their eyes, a young, hot-headed guardsman named Finn, a cook who secretly spiced the food with rebellious vigor. Each of her acts was a direct assault on the bloom. And each time, the rose would react. A petal would become cloudy. A tiny splinter would appear on its stem. The king's response was swift and severe. The singer of a bawdy tavern song had his tongue removed. The wearer of a yellow dress was publicly shamed. The kingdom was becoming a prison, its warden a flower. Lyra confronted her father in his throne room, a chamber that felt more like a tomb. You are sacrificing your people for a trinket. she accused, her voice trembling with rage. It is not a trinket. Theron thundered, his composure shattered. It is the embodiment of an ideal. It is proof that we can rise above our messy, fleeting, disgusting mortal coil. These people, their little joys, their petty sorrows, they are fuel for a greater purpose. Their lives are given meaning by sustaining something eternal. You call this meaning? Lyra cried. This is not life, father. It is a curated death. That rose is a parasite. The rose is our salvation from mediocrity. He screamed. In his fury, he backhanded her across the face. The blow was not hard, but the shock of it silenced them both. Lyra touched her stinging cheek, tears of pain and betrayal welling in her eyes. Theron looked at his hand as if it belonged to a stranger. In that moment of high, sharp, painful emotion, a father's rage and a daughter's heartbreak, a loud crack echoed from the garden. They rushed out. The crystal bloom had a new fissure, this one deeper, running down the center of the bloom like a scar. But it wasn't gray or fading. From the crack seeped a thin, black, viscous fluid that dripped onto the pale gravel below, sizzling like acid. The bloom was not just starved by strong emotion. It was wounded by it. And it was bleeding. Chapter 4, The Heart of the Stone. Chaol was summoned once more. He observed the bleeding rose, and for the first time, a flicker of something, fear, crossed his vacant face. I miscalculated, he whispered, more to himself than to the king. I used my own blood, my own sorrow, to give it life. I thought it would only require passive melancholy. But it has a taste for it now. It has become hungry. And what you have just fed it, this raw, potent mix of rage and pain, it has awakened a different appetite. The black fluid, he explained, was concentrated emotional toxicity, the dregs of the feelings the bloom could not assimilate. It was the pure essence of despair, of betrayed love, of shattered trust. The garden is no longer safe, Chaol said. This substance, it corrupts whatever it touches. As if to prove his point, a drop of the black fluid landed on a stone bench. The smooth, grey stone instantly turned brittle and crumbled into black dust. King Theron was torn between his terror for his treasure and his dawning, horrifying understanding of what he had done to his daughter. The sight of the bleeding, corrupted rose was finally breaking through his obsession. Lyra saw her chance. Chaol, how do we stop it? Can it be destroyed? Destroyed? Theron gasped, but the protest was weak. It cannot be shattered by any hammer, Chaol said. Its core is bound with my life force and the king's desire. But every organism has a weakness. The bloom's perfection is its prison. It cannot tolerate true chaos, true, unrefined, messy life. To break it, you would have to overwhelm it with something more powerful than its capacity to consume. You would have to offer it a heart. A heart? Lyra asked. The heart of a kingdom, Chaol clarified, his eyes meeting hers. Not one person's sorrow, but the collective, beating, chaotic, beautiful, terrible heart of every soul in Veridia. You would have to make them feel, all at once, everything they have been forced to repress. The joy, the anger, the love, the grief. It would be a cataclysm of feeling. It might shatter the bloom. Or it might shatter us all. Lyra knew what she had to do. It was a desperate, dangerous gamble. She looked at her father, who had sunk to his knees before his dying masterpiece, a broken man finally seeing the monster he had created. Then that is what we will do, Lyra said, her voice filled with a royal authority she had never used before. Gather the people, in the main square. Tell them the princess commands them to remember how to feel. Chapter 5, The Symphony of Ruin. It was the strangest proclamation Veridia had ever heard. The people, dull-eyed and listless, gathered in the central square, confused and afraid. Lyra stood on a balcony, Finn and the rebellious cook at her side. King Theron watched from a distant window, unable to face them. The crystal bloom, now oozing steady threads of black poison, was brought from the garden and placed on a pedestal in the square. Its presence cast a wave of cold silence. "People of Veridia," Lyra cried, her voice cutting through the stillness. "This thing, this beautiful lie, has been feeding on you. It has drunk your tears and starved your hearts. My father asked for your silence, but I ask for your voice." She began to sing, not a gentle melody, but a raucous, off-key drinking song from the band play. It was clumsy and loud. Nothing about it was perfect. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the cook, a stout woman named Marta, started to laugh. It was a loud, bellowing, real laugh. Someone else, emboldened, shouted an old curse. A child, confused by the adult's strange behavior, began to wail. The dam broke. The square erupted into a cacophony of sound. Years of suppressed emotion came pouring out. People argued, embraced, confessed long-held loves, screamed their frustrations at the sky. It was not beautiful. It was messy, chaotic, and utterly, vibrantly human. The crystal bloom reacted violently. It began to pulse, its rosy light flaring and dimming erratically. The black fissure widened, pouring out the toxic dregs. The beautiful petals turned dark, then transparent, then began to vibrate. Lyra poured every ounce of her own feeling into the chaos, her love for her broken father, her anger at his tyranny, her hope for her people, her fear of failure. She was the conductor of a symphony of ruin. The bloom could not process it. The scale, the intensity, the imperfection of it was an overload. It was trying to consume our ocean with a thimble. With a sound that was neither a shatter nor a scream, but something in between, the crystal bloom exploded. It did not fragment into shards. It dissolved into a fine, sparkling mist that hung in the air for a moment, smelling oddly of both roses and ozone, before dissipating. The black, toxic fluid that had seeped from it evaporated into harmless vapor. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of suppression, but the stunned, breathless silence after a storm. Epilogue: the first seed. The kingdom of Veridia did not instantly become a paradise. The people were left raw and emotionally spent. King Theron, stripped of his obsession, abdicated the throne and retired to a monastery, seeking a forgiveness he knew he might never find. Lyra became queen. Her first act was to have the Garden of Frozen Tears torn up. She and Kale, who had regained a flicker of the humanity he had sacrificed, worked together, not with crystal, but with soil. It was hard, slow work. The ground was hard and barren, poisoned by years of symbolic and literal emotional neglect. But they persevered. One day, as Lyra was turning the earth, her hand closed around something small and hard. It was a single, perfect, blood-red rose hip that had lain dormant in the soil, waiting. A seed from a rose that had grown there before the king's madness. She planted it in the rich, newly turned earth. When it bloomed the following year, it was not a perfect flower. It was lopsided. One petal had a brown spot. An aphid was nibbling on its stem. But its color was a vibrant, defiant red, and its scent was rich and complex. It was alive. It was real. It was flawed. And for Queen Lyra and her people, that was more beautiful than any crystal perfection could ever be. They had learned that true beauty was not in eternal, frozen stillness, but in the fragile, messy, and magnificent struggle to grow, to feel, and to bloom, however imperfectly, under a real and changing sky.
If you feel a chill down your spine, don't worry. They're just standing behind you, listening with you. Thank you for daring to enter the world of fairy tales of Nim. We'll see you again next night, if you're still around.